Hey guys, tonight we walk straight into a cold, rough world where justice tastes like salt, steel, and blood. You stand on a windswept plain, boots sinking into damp earth as the echoes of rage bounce off distant stones. Around you, men and women gather in tight knots, hands gripping the hilts of axes, eyes wary, hungry, calculating. You feel the tension in the air, the kind that prickles your neck and dares you to breathe. Here, in the far north, there is no comfortable courtroom, no kindly judge with a powdered wig. There is only you, your kin, and the ironclad law of vengeance. And tonight, well, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and your local time down below too. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey begins with the blood feud, a tradition so old it almost feels baked into the bones of the Viking soul. You see a young man, trembling, his hand pressed against a wound that seeps crimson into the grass. His brothers stand around him, fury building like a storm cloud. You hear someone spit the word, Fager, doomed. There will be no mercy. The family of the wounded boy will demand blood in return. An eye for an eye, a son for a son. Historians still argue whether these feuds were as endless and savage as the sagas tell, or if they were sometimes settled quietly behind closed doors. But out here, tonight, you can smell the fear. The families will gather witnesses, rally distant cousins, and drag the quarrel through every hamlet until vengeance feels like a holy mission. One mainstream truth is that the Viking sense of honor made these feuds almost impossible to escape. If you let a wrong go unanswered, you lost face. Worse, you invited more attacks. So feuds weren't just revenge, they were social armor, a public declaration that you were not to be trampled. You watch as the dead man's brother lifts a sayax blade, the polished iron glinting in the low light. His face is carved from ice, no pity in those blue eyes. Blood must balance blood, he says, and you almost flinch at how normal that sounds here. They will count cattle, measure land, but in the end, no sum feels fair enough when grief burns in the gut. A quirky detail you catch. Sometimes people tried to dodge these feuds by moving overseas, settling in Iceland, hoping distance would cool the rage. But somehow, word always traveled faster than ships, and revenge had a way of crossing oceans, patient as frost. You drift along the edge of the gathering, feet crunching dried heather, listening as neighbors weigh in. An older woman, voice sharp as a whetstone, reminds the crowd of an insult from 20 years past. A goat stolen, an uncle beaten in a brawl. All of it bubbles up again, as if time cannot truly bury a wound. You sigh, realizing how exhausting that must be, carrying every slight for decades, adding it to a tally sheet that no one can ever fully repay. Some tried to fix this tangled mess with arbitration, arranging public payments or alliances through marriage. But for every clever peacebroker, a dozen hot-headed warriors roared that only a blade could erase shame. You can practically feel their pounding hearts, the same restless fury that still crops up in bar fights today. As night closes in, the crowd shadows twist like something alive, swallowing reason. A child clutches his mother's skirt, wide-eyed, learning already that, in Viking society, violence was a language as common as bread. No one is surprised. No one even flinches. The family of the dead begins a ritual lament, voices rising in a harsh, broken chorus that vibrates in your chest. It is a sound to break the stars, a promise to the ancestors that they will avenge their blood. And you stand there, heart hammering, realizing there is no law here except the blade, no court but the clan. You wonder, as you shift from foot to foot, whether any of these people truly believe justice lives in this spiral of payback. Maybe they do. Maybe they have no choice. Maybe fairness is simply another word for survival, and survival demands you look as dangerous as the world itself. The next morning, you walk past a house burned to the ground. Revenge for revenge, a new wound opened. Charred beams point at the sky like accusing fingers. The air still smells of wet ash and scorched earth, and you can't help but think, who will balance this debt, and how many more will fall before the scales rest? Your boots carry you onward, the ground littered with bits of pottery, trampled grain, a lone sandal abandoned in flight. The feud has left its mark. People glance at you as if they expect your loyalty, expect your sword, expect you to pick a side. In this world, neutrality is as rare as peace. And you walk on, knowing that even if you survive today, tomorrow the scales might swing again, drawing your blood this time. The Vikings carved this world from ice and iron, and they carried that iron into their justice, heavy, unyielding, and impossibly personal. You follow a trail through damp grass toward a clearing where the Thing assembly is about to begin. The Viking version of a public court, a parliament, a place to hash out disputes and weigh laws. The sun strikes the water with a white glare, and you shade your eyes as dozens of people gather, their tunics and cloaks a shifting tapestry of russet, saffron, and blue. You might imagine this is some grand and fair-minded democracy, but trust me, you'd be wrong. They call it the Thing, and on paper, it's every free person's right to show up, speak, and vote. But you soon notice how the loudest voices belong to men wearing heavy gold rings, their belts studded with silver, their axes etched with runes that spell out family power. The poorest farmers shuffle around the edges, their hands deep in their sleeves, careful not to draw any attention. Freedom was a relative concept, even here. You pause by a crooked wooden pole planted into the ground, its top carved with a serpent knot. This is where oaths will be sworn, accusations hurled, and blood debts balanced. The pole smells of old smoke and sweat, stained by decades of furious arguments. One mainstream fact you can't ignore is that these things were the backbone of Viking legal culture, repeated all across Scandinavia. But historians still argue whether they were truly as open and participatory as the sagas claim, or if they were stacked in favor of the local big shots. You can probably guess which way I'm leaning. The air is thick with tension as one claimant steps forward, a tall man with a scar running from chin to ear. He points a bony finger and accuses a neighbor of stealing 2 oxen. His voice rings out, clear as a hunting horn, but a few men behind him murmur their support, making it obvious he's no lone victim. The defendant's eyes dart side to side, searching for allies. In a world like this, alliances often outweighed truth. You catch a quirky moment. Someone has brought along a small black goat, painted with runes on its horns, apparently to encourage the gods to favor his case. A goat as legal good luck charm? You'd be surprised how common that was. The law speaker, a gray-haired man in a cloak embroidered with tiny ships, raises his hand. Silence falls. He begins reciting law phrases in a sing-song voice, as if he has sung them since he learned to walk. You see the crowd shift, half listening, half scanning one another for who might carry a grudge. A fair trial? That was a dream. One woman near you tries to speak, her voice drowned instantly by men shouting over her. Her hands ball into fists, then relax again, and she steps back. You wonder how many truths were buried like that, trampled under voices stronger and richer. As the next case begins, you spot a teenage boy balancing on a tree stump, trying to get a look over the press of bodies. His mouth is slightly open, eyes huge, soaking up every detail. You wonder if he is memorizing this scene to brag later. That he saw justice unfold, even if what he's really seeing is a well-oiled machine for protecting the powerful. The thing court goes on for hours. People argue about sheep, boundary stones, a stolen comb, even a broken betrothal. Every complaint is a spark that could light a firestorm if the crowd gets too riled up. You think of modern courtrooms with their tidy benches and polite judges, and laugh a little at how far away that feels right now. One family is forced to pay a fine in silver for accidentally killing a neighbor's hound. They look sour about it, but still hand over the coins. Here, dogs had more guaranteed justice than some humans, depending on who owned them. You see how these assemblies were meant to keep society from tearing itself apart. And sometimes they managed, but at a price. Everything depended on status, on alliances, on the gossip whispered in the hall before you ever stepped onto this field. If you stood alone, well, may the gods help you, because no one else would. Someone starts playing a bone flute, its shrill note floating over the chaos, trying to soothe the crowd. It almost works, until two men nearly come to blows over a pig's missing ear. You duck back just in case, feeling how quickly things can pivot from words to weapons. By nightfall, the crowd begins to thin, but the air stays charged, as if the ground itself remembers every insult, every threat, every promise of revenge. The wooden pole, scorched and battered, seems to stand taller now, holding the weight of another day's grudges. And you step away from the thing field with the sense that you have witnessed a performance. A loud, messy performance where justice was only half the script. Power, pride, and fear made up the rest, twisting the law until it bent like a sapling in a storm. Your path leads on from this place, feet tracing muddy cart ruts toward the next settlement, where you'll see an even darker kind of trial waiting for you. Because if a feud or a thing couldn't fix a crime, then the gods would be called upon to choose, with a test that might break even the strongest. You walk into a chill morning that bites at your fingertips, and your boots crunch through a crust of frost as you cross a yard toward a small circle of men and women. They stand by a slab of stone, darkened by countless spills of water, blood, and who knows what else. You're about to witness what passed for divine judgment among the Vikings, a trial by ordeal. Yes, tonight you get to test your nerves right alongside them. You probably won't survive this, by the way. But then again, neither did many who tried. Here's how it worked. If the thing assembly couldn't decide a case, or if someone refused to accept its ruling, the gods would have to be consulted. The method? Pain. A red-hot iron pulled from the coals, a bucket of scalding water, or a trial of stepping across burning plowshares. You're supposed to come through unharmed if you are truly innocent. You watch as one man is chosen to prove himself. His hand trembles as a priestly figure sets an iron rod in the hearth's flame. Nearby, women murmur prayers, clutching charms made of knotted wool and little copper discs. You wonder if these talismans really worked or just kept their owners from losing their minds. Historians still argue whether such charms offered real protection or were purely psychological crutches. One mainstream fact here is chillingly simple. Trial by ordeal was a perfectly legitimate piece of Viking law. It could happen in any settlement, and the results were rarely in favor of the poor soul being tested. But somehow, that didn't stop people from trusting the process, because it felt safer than letting neighbors or enemies decide alone. The hot iron glows an angry orange. The accused reaches for it, teeth gritted, eyes fixed on a god he hopes is watching. You wince as he takes 3 measured steps, clutching the iron, and then places it on the stone slab. His skin is scorched, the smell of burned flesh turning your stomach. A quick joke comes to mind. If the gods really wanted to judge, you'd think they could invent a more hygienic method, right? But in this world, scars were proof, not just wounds. After the ordeal, the accused's hand is bound in linen, marked with charms and smeared with a healing salve made of sheep fat and pine resin. If the wound heals clean after 3 days, he is innocent. If not, he is guilty and might be exiled or even executed. You see how everyone leans in, practically holding their breath, like gamblers at a dice table waiting to see how the odds fall. A dog sniffs around the edges of the gathering, tail tucked, as if even it knows something terrible might happen. And you feel the same tension, the sense that this whole affair teeters on the edge of disaster. You notice an odd detail. One woman offers the iron holder a drink of mead laced with herbs meant to dull pain, though that was strictly frowned upon by some priests. Another corner of Viking belief was that if you were truly innocent, you shouldn't need help, but a little cheating, hard to blame anyone when your life's on the line. There's a terrible hush after the ordeal ends, a kind of sacred silence. People study the burn, their faces tight with dread and fascination, searching for signs of blisters or healthy pink skin. You stand close enough to smell the scorched wool of his sleeve, to feel the radiating heat of the stone, and to hear the slow, hopeless breathing of the man whose fate is hanging by a scab. Historians still debate whether these trials were truly about faith or about scaring people so badly they'd comply with whatever verdict the powerful wanted anyway. From the look in these villagers' eyes, you suspect the fear mattered more than any god's will. One older man, his beard braided with tiny beads, mutters about an ordeal he saw as a boy, when a woman survived the iron but died of infection anyway. You wonder how often justice was tangled with heartbreak, with accidents, with the cruel randomness of a world that refused to be fair. As the crowd begins to drift away, you catch the faint echo of a chant, low and rhythmic, asking Thor to stand witness. The burned man cradles his bandaged hand, flanked by relatives who look half proud and half terrified. There's no celebration, just a gray weariness that sinks into their shoulders. You turn to leave, walking across a field where the grass is rimed with ice, the sun just beginning to melt it into silvery drops. You glance back, seeing the men pack up their iron tools, their herbs, their charms, stuffing them into cloth bags. The stone slab stays behind, waiting for its next victim. Every step away from that place feels lighter, as if you've dodged something that could have burned you down to the bone. Yet you know there is no escaping the next part of Viking justice either: blood feuds, revenge killings, and the chilling logic of honor. So, you breathe a little easier, but not too easy, because your path leads toward the kind of conflict that no god's judgment could prevent. Only human rage could decide what happened next. And that, friend, might be the worst trial of all. You carry that memory of scorched iron with you as you trudge deeper into the settlement. A cold wind whips off the water, snapping your cloak against your legs, and you see people gathered on the rocky shore. They're discussing a killing, not an accidental one, but a blood feud. Here, among the Vikings, murder was rarely just a crime. It was an insult, a wound to family honor, and it demanded a reply. Hey, don't get too comfortable. This next bit is about as cozy as hugging a porcupine. The law was crystal clear, at least on parchment. If someone killed your kin, you were owed compensation. That could be silver, land, livestock, or in some cases a bride to seal the peace. But if the killer's family refused to pay, or if the victim's kin rejected the settlement, then a blood feud erupted. One mainstream historical fact: blood feuds were a legal reality. There were even rules. You couldn't kill on holy days, you had to give notice before attacking, and you should avoid harming bystanders if possible. Basically, a very polite, scheduled sort of revenge. But the rules were just thin threads trying to bind down a raging bull. You watch a man, still streaked with tears, demanding silver for the death of his brother. The killer's cousin stands across from him, jaw tight, trying not to show fear. A mediator, usually a respected local farmer or a priest, steps between them, holding up a staff carved with runes of peace. That staff is the only thing keeping swords in their sheaths right now. Historians still argue whether these mediations were truly fair or simply ways for powerful clans to twist the rules. And honestly, staring at the hard eyes of the men around you, you suspect raw strength counted for more than any fancy oath. One odd detail catches your eye. A bystander carries a length of woven cloth dyed a bright saffron yellow. It's a feud flag, a signal that no weapons should be drawn while negotiation continues. Even in the middle of a powder keg, the Vikings had invented their own medieval traffic light. A dog barks behind you, breaking the tension for a heartbeat, but the men barely flinch. All eyes lock on the mediator as he weighs each word, trying to measure silver against spilled blood. The prices you overhear could be truly bizarre. A high-born warrior might be valued at dozens of cows, while a thrall, a slave, was worth maybe a single goat. And no one pretended that was fair, just normal. The more you listen, the clearer it is. If you had no kin, you had no leverage. No one to pay for you, no one to take up arms for you. You were basically toast if someone put a sword in your gut, because no one would come to avenge you or buy your peace. Viking justice was family justice. Stand alone, and you were meat on the table. You step closer to the crowd, inhaling the sharp salt of the sea, the sour tang of unwashed wool, and the faint copper bite of blood. Everything about this scene feels ancient and inevitable, a cycle going back centuries, no matter how many Christian priests tried to replace it with gentler codes. A quick joke flickers through your mind. You'd think they might at least hire a therapist with all this drama, but no, swords and silver were therapy enough for these folks. As the mediator proposes a price, 20 marks of silver plus 3 cows, the grieving brother snarls, spits in the dirt, and storms away. Looks like the feud will go on. You can almost hear the gears clicking into place, alliances being forged, neighbors picking sides, weapons sharpened behind barn doors. The victim's kin will gather their friends and distant cousins, while the killer's family does the same. Soon, blood will spill again, and the pattern will repeat. Historians still debate whether this system helped keep the peace by giving people an outlet, or whether it just spread the poison further and further, making war an everyday fact of life. You watch these men, their faces set in grim determination, and it's hard to see much justice here, just an endless loop of pain and pride. As dusk begins to fall, torches spark along the edge of the settlement. The men drift away to plan their next moves, leaving you alone with the sound of the tide washing against the rocks. It feels timeless, that hush between waves, as if even the ocean is tired of all the violence. You glance up at the hills beyond the water, wondering how many feuds had been fought and refought up there, how many stories still echo in the grass, telling of sons murdered, fathers avenged, mothers weeping into the night. You keep walking, boots grinding into the stony path, feeling how heavy the Viking idea of honor truly was. So heavy it crushed logic, crushed forgiveness, crushed even hope, until only vengeance felt satisfying. That weight follows you down the trail as you leave the shoreline behind, heading toward the next place where so-called justice played its dangerous games. It's getting colder now, and the wind feels sharp as a knife, but compared to the blades that might flash in the night during a blood feud, you'll take the chill any day. You press on, wondering what fresh terrors Viking law has waiting around the next bend. The wind keeps snapping at your cloak as you push inland, toward a cluster of wooden farmhouses surrounded by frost-bitten fields. The landscape is quiet, almost gentle, until you notice a small group gathered near a rune-covered stone. You recognize the marks of a thing, the Viking assembly, where disputes were judged and laws recited. Don't expect a court with a powdered wig here. The thing was more like a rowdy village meeting, crossed with a reality show, crossed with a fist fight waiting to happen. You slip in among the crowd, smelling wood smoke and wet wool, as the local chieftain stands on a raised stone, staff in hand. He's about to settle a land dispute, and you quickly catch the details. Two brothers fighting over the same strip of barley field, each swearing that their father promised it to him alone. Here in the Viking world, property was a serious matter because it meant survival. One mainstream historical fact to note: land ownership in Viking society was passed down through both male and female lines, though men usually controlled its daily use. But how you proved your right was another story entirely. Witnesses could be bribed, documents might conveniently vanish, and the strongest family often got their way by force if the thing failed. Historians still argue whether the thing genuinely functioned as a democratic assembly or was just a puppet stage for local big shots to flex their power. From the skeptical looks in the crowd, you suspect people here didn't trust the chieftain any more than you'd trust a used car salesman. One delightfully strange detail: you spot a young boy holding a basket of salted fish, ready as an offering to the gods if the trial went especially badly. Superstition ran side by side with law. If the human judges couldn't be swayed, maybe the divine ones could. The chieftain raises his voice, listing the boundaries of the disputed field, describing how far it stretched from the standing stone to the birch tree, then down to the stream. The brothers shout over him, fists clenched, each trying to drown the other out. There's an almost theatrical flair to the insults they trade, and the crowd eats it up like a wrestling match. When the chieftain finally gestures for silence, the hush is instant. Blades of grass would dare not rustle. He asks the first brother for witnesses. 3 farmers step forward, all squinting as if they wish they were literally anywhere else. Their words tumble out, hesitant, trying not to offend. You can feel the tension swirl through the onlookers like smoke from a damp fire, because land, more than gold, more than weapons, was what a Viking held most dear. Take a man's field, and you might as well steal his children's future. One quick joke crosses your mind. If you really wanted to annoy a Viking, just threaten to plant your potatoes on his barley strip. Nothing would make you a lifelong enemy faster. The second brother jumps in, dragging his own witnesses forward, and they contradict the first group on almost every point. You sense that no one truly knows the truth anymore, but no one dares admit it. In the old days, a quick duel might have decided it, but with Christianity's influence, these trial debates had grown more polite, or at least less immediately bloody. The chieftain leans on his staff, eyes narrowed, trying to read which brother has more supporters. It's as much about alliances as evidence, and you watch him weighing who might rise up if he rules the wrong way. Historians still debate whether the thing was fair at all, or just a theater to keep people from murdering each other outright. You could argue that making them talk it out in public helped calm the blood, even if the final verdict was often twisted by money or muscle. The verdict comes down finally with a heavy note of finality. The elder brother is awarded the land, not because he proved his claim beyond doubt, but because he had more kin at his side and the crowd seemed to favor him. You notice the loser turning away, lips thin with rage, already plotting how to get back what he believes is his. There it is again, that constant Viking pattern: settle the score, even if you have to wait years to do it. As people drift away, muttering to each other, you take in the sagging thatch roofs, the thin cattle wandering muddy paddocks, the chill settling in again. This was their entire world: land to survive, cattle to breed, laws to protect it, and men willing to break those laws whenever the outcome didn't suit them. Your boots sink into the muddy ground as you leave the thing behind, that rune stone glinting in the last rays of afternoon. The chieftain's voice fades behind you, replaced by the soft rustle of wind through bare branches, as if the land itself was tired of listening to all these arguments. It strikes you then that Viking justice was less about finding the truth and more about keeping the peace just long enough for the harvest to come in. And if peace didn't stick, well, sharpen the axes and try again next year. The sun drops lower, brushing the settlement in a red-gold glow that feels almost too beautiful for a place so tangled with grudges. You sigh, adjusting your cloak, and turn your steps toward a new tale waiting in the next valley, where even stranger ideas of punishment would soon be on display. You step along the rough track away from the thing site, boots sticky with churned mud, and your mind still buzzing from all that shouting. If you thought Viking justice was only about land and property, brace yourself, because in the next settlement, they have a far more gruesome method for handling the worst crimes: outlawry. The twilight is deepening, turning the world to dusky blue when you spot a small ring of stones marking the village border. That's where they would announce an outlaw's fate, a punishment so final it basically erased you from society. No welcome, no food, no shelter. You were, quite literally, a dead man walking. The word for it, skoganger, meant going into the forest. But you can think of it more as being thrown to the wolves. Some outlaws tried to hide close to home. Others fled overseas. Many didn't survive a month. One mainstream historical fact is that outlawry was a standard penalty for serious crimes like killing outside of a formal duel, breaking holy oaths, or refusing to pay compensation after a blood feud. A Viking's honor was partly measured by how well he respected the rules around killing. Kill the wrong person at the wrong time, and the community would toss you out without a second thought. Historians still argue whether outlawry was meant more as a moral punishment or a practical method of population control, thinning out dangerous hotheads without filling the graveyards. You suspect it was a bit of both, a chilling reminder that Viking society might tolerate a brawl but not a chaos bringer. One fringe detail you find oddly fascinating. There were songs about outlaw heroes, a kind of Viking Robin Hood myth, men who survived for years outside the law and came back even stronger. The idea that you could turn outlawry into a twisted badge of honor made the whole thing a bit less predictable. You stand for a moment by the stones, imagining the grim announcement. Maybe a crowd gathered in silence while the local law speaker recited the name, then described the crimes, then the punishment. Banished, stripped of all protections. If someone killed you after that, no one would lift a finger in protest. You shiver, thinking how terrifying it would feel to know the entire world had permission to end your life. Worse, that no one would even care enough to bury you properly. Around you, the villagers seem tense, going about their chores with quick, silent steps. They know outlawry is an invisible stain, a crack in the community's trust. If someone in their group could turn so dangerous, what did that say about the rest of them? You notice a trio of boys with wooden swords reenacting the outlaw's sentencing in a cruel child's game. One pretends to flee, the others chase him, shouting curses. It's harsh, but children learn early how fragile their place in Viking society could be. There's a strange beauty in how thorough outlawry was. No appeals, no second chances, no sanctuary. It was an act of social self-defense, and it left a mark deeper than any blade. If you couldn't be trusted to follow the rules, you were cast out so completely you almost stopped being human. A quick joke crosses your mind, maybe to lighten the gloom. Imagine getting banished from the local barbecue because you double-dipped your sausage in the communal mustard. Harsh crowd, these Vikings. But of course, real outlawry was no laughing matter. If you couldn't survive, you'd die of hunger or cold faster than you'd find a new friend. And even if you did survive, you'd become a living ghost, with no clan, no kin, and no place to rest your bones. The wind starts to pick up again, rattling the shutters on a nearby farmhouse, and you catch snatches of gossip from a couple of women hauling water. Rumors about a man who had killed a neighbor over an insult and vanished into the forest. Some swore he was hiding with allies, waiting for revenge. Others said wolves had already found him. Historians still debate how many outlaws actually came back to society. Some sources say they could be forgiven if they paid enough compensation later, but others insist there was no way back from that kind of exile. Maybe it depended on who you knew or how useful you were when you returned. You move on past a pen of thin goats bleating hungrily, and the world feels just a bit sharper, as if every sound could be a predator. That was the world of the outlaw, cold, merciless, and full of teeth. As darkness swallows the trail, you pause and look up at the scatter of stars. Those same stars might have guided exiles trying to cross to Iceland or farther, hoping to outrun their punishment. It was a gamble few won. Your footsteps slow, imagining the faces of people forced to watch an outlaw go, someone they had shared bread with just days before. That emptiness, that sense of loss, must have haunted them longer than any feud. In the end, outlawry was about fear. Fear of what a person might do if left unchecked. Fear of how fast violence could eat through a community. The law alone couldn't tame human anger, but banishing its worst offenders at least bought a fragile peace. And if the price of that peace was a man's life, well, the Vikings would pay it without flinching. The night air cuts colder as you pick up your pace, thinking about the next path ahead. A place where a stranger, more symbolic sort of justice waited, echoing with blood and buried iron. You walk deeper into the darkness, the road narrowing under a ragged arch of fir trees. A damp chill seeps into your cloak, making you wish for a bright hall fire. But where you're going next, no warm hearth waits. Only the harsh glare of Viking ritual, tangled with law, fear, and a twisted sense of fairness. Because tonight, you will learn about trial by ordeal. Hey, it sounds almost modern, right? Put the accused to the test, see if they pass. But the Viking version was a bit more, let's say, hands-on. If you were accused of a crime without clear proof, like theft, sorcery, or adultery, the community sometimes turned to ordeal. One mainstream historical fact is that a common ordeal involved grabbing a red-hot iron bar and carrying it for a set number of paces. Afterward, your wounds would be bandaged and inspected days later. If they healed cleanly, you were innocent. If they festered, you were guilty. Boom, divine judgment, Viking style. Historians still argue whether the ordeal really served as a legal tool or if it was a form of public theater to reassure neighbors that justice had been served. After all, the gods were supposed to protect the blameless, but maybe it was also a convenient excuse to remove someone you already disliked. A fringe tidbit that will curl your toes. In some sagas, there are hints people cheated at ordeal by bribing the priest, getting a cooler piece of iron, or rehearsing the ritual to toughen their skin. So much for divine fairness. You reach a clearing where the villagers once gathered to watch these trials, a circle of blackened stones still holding the ghost of old fires. You imagine the crowd pressing in, breath steaming in the cold air, eyes locked on the trembling accused. There is a harsh kind of intimacy to it, everyone watching every heartbeat, every step. Some cases tested your honesty instead. One variant called for plunging your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone, or swearing an oath while standing on a blade. If you lied, the gods would curse you, or so they said. You pause, picturing your own fingers around a glowing bar of iron. It's hard not to wince. Jokes about trial by spicy pizza seem very, very tame by comparison. As you walk around the scorched circle, you catch a whiff of old ash, and it triggers something deep. These rituals weren't just about pain, they were about fear. They made people afraid to lie, to cheat, to break their word. A Viking's reputation was more fragile than you might think. An ordeal was a hammer meant to keep everyone honest. Of course, sometimes it broke them instead. Imagine the pressure, your entire community gathered to watch you pass or fail, your life in the balance. A single slip meaning ruin. It's no wonder a few souls tried to game the system. You notice a faint carving on a stone near your boot, half buried in moss, the swirl of a serpent. Maybe a mark left by someone desperate for luck on the day of their trial. That swirl feels older than any law, a quiet plea to forces beyond human reach. Historians still debate if ordeal had any genuine legal weight, or was purely a ritual to calm the public. Either way, it was terrifying, because whether you trusted the gods or not, everyone trusted pain. As night thickens, you try to picture one of those rituals in detail. A priest in russet robes overseeing the fire, a small boy with a bucket of cold water ready, villagers holding their breath as the iron turned white hot. It is a scene so stark it feels like a nightmare. You wonder if people slept better after watching someone burned and judged, or if the screams followed them into their dreams. There's a grim logic to ordeal, a world so uncertain, so full of danger, that only a test of agony seemed trustworthy. And then, just like that, the rhythm of Viking daily life went on. If you passed your ordeal, you were welcome again at the feast, your good name restored. If you failed, well, at least they knew where to bury you. It's hard to imagine living with that threat hanging over your head, a blade sharper than any sword, waiting for the day someone accused you of the wrong thing. In that moment, truth didn't matter as much as endurance. Pain decided everything. You move away from the circle of stones, brushing pine needles from your sleeve, heart heavy with the knowledge that these people, for all their fierce independence, still needed a terror greater than their own to keep them honest. One more joke slips through your mind. If you had to grab red-hot iron every time you told a fib, you better keep the bandages handy. The Vikings had no patience for half-truths or convenient lies. They wanted certainty, even if it burned. Far ahead, the glow of another settlement flickers through the trees. Another thing sight, another law to puzzle through. The path between your boots feels ancient, worn by the steps of hundreds who came to witness pain as proof. You take a breath, steeling yourself for what comes next, because Viking justice had yet another flavor waiting for you. One served not by gods, but by men's own thirst for revenge. And that lesson will be even harder to swallow. You follow the path toward an old clearing that still hums with the ghosts of disputes long settled, or perhaps never truly finished. Here, under a heavy sky, you can almost hear the echoes of those who came to stake their lives on the line. Because when Wergild failed, the Vikings had another tool waiting: trial by ordeal. Let that idea sink in for a moment. If you couldn't pay the blood price, or no one trusted you to tell the truth, then you might be asked to plunge your arm into boiling water or grip a glowing hot iron rod. If your wounds healed cleanly afterward, you were declared innocent. If they festered, well, the gods had judged you guilty. You wince just picturing it, a little shiver skating down your spine. It makes a crocodile dung sunscreen look downright civilized, but the logic, twisted as it was, still had its roots in a community trying to keep order. When evidence was thin, people leaned on the divine to pick sides. You stand by a mossy boulder that was once a seat for witnesses, the rock stained from countless fires built to heat those rods. It is easy to imagine the silence that fell over the gathering, how the villagers would hold their breath waiting to see if the accused would scream. That hush carried the weight of centuries, a hush that could decide a person's entire fate. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were meant to punish or to deter, or maybe to test someone's courage as much as their truthfulness. It's a debate that refuses to die, like so many of these Viking customs. One fringe story even claims that certain local healers would secretly treat the accused with herbs to help the burns heal faster, a shady hack to pass the gods' test. That's human nature, though. Where there's a loophole, someone will find it. You step past a pile of rotting timbers that might once have framed a hall where these ordeals took place, the air still faintly carrying a sour memory of scorched skin. A tough reminder that Viking justice never stopped at a fine or a feud. If needed, it dragged the divine itself into the fight. There's something almost comforting in how raw, how human it all was. People desperate to prove themselves, to hold on to a scrap of dignity, even if it meant scarring their hands for life. It says a lot about how high the stakes were. The next thought is even darker. What if you refuse the ordeal? Simple. You were judged guilty by default. Refusal was a confession. That's a no-win scenario, if there ever was one. You rest against a half-fallen fence, its wood silvered by endless winters, and let your imagination wander. How many mothers watch their sons walk toward a steaming pot, praying their flesh would stay whole? How many husbands force their wives to step forward just to settle a rumor? The Vikings might have thought it was fair because at least the gods had a say. But to your modern eyes, it looks more like rolling dice with your entire existence. It's a fair bet most of us would rather sit through a tax audit than face the blistering touch of a red-hot iron. Still, these tests had their place in a world where written records were rare, where witnesses might lie, and where reputation was everything. Sometimes you needed a spectacle so big no one could doubt its outcome. You step back, eyes scanning the horizon, and feel a strange respect for people who endured that terror, who braced themselves to be judged not just by their neighbors, but by a God who might not even be listening. That takes a certain iron in the soul. In the hush, you hear the echo of a voice, the old skald's chant maybe, telling how a chieftain once survived the ordeal and rose to greatness, scars and all. These stories never die, passed down to remind you that the path to honor was never smooth, never guaranteed, never safe, and that is where you leave the ordeal behind, walking onward into the final shadows of this journey. Because Viking justice did not stop with the gods either, there was yet another, far colder check on power. Exile, the ultimate punishment. If your crimes were too great, or your feud too bloody, you would be cast out. The land itself would turn its back, and you would lose your place in the only community that mattered. That is the peace waiting on the next hill. A punishment worse than death, worse than scars, where even your own name could be stolen away. You climb the hill, boots biting into the scrubby turf, breathing the sharp, iron-edged air of a place where judgments still echo. This is where they sent the exiles, men and women branded so dangerous, so untrustworthy, that no feud, no weregild, no ordeal could settle their sins. Exile was the final hammer, a punishment as hard as the stone of these cliffs. Imagine it for a second. Stripped of your home, your family, your honor. Everything you owned was forfeit, every friend forbidden to help you, every neighbor told to turn their eyes away. You were left to wander, alone, in a world where loneliness might kill faster than any sword. The Vikings called it Fjörbaugsgarder, a mouthful of a word meaning 3 boundaries. You could live only within a certain distance, beyond the reach of society, for 3 years, or sometimes forever. During that time, you were as good as dead. Anyone could kill you, and no one would answer for it. Historians still argue whether exile was more merciful than execution, or a cruelty designed to let someone rot slowly under the weight of shame. There's no clear answer. Some survived and returned, hardened and humbled. Some vanished without a trace. Some never even made it past the first winter. One quirky tale says a Viking outlaw survived by taming a half-wild wolf pack, running with them until his term ended. It sounds like a campfire story, but then again, these people lived in a world where anything felt possible. You pause by an old post once used to mark the exile's path, its runes barely readable now, and feel a cold sympathy for those who were forced to walk away. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a death of the soul. To be denied community was to be denied everything that made life worth living. You walk on, wind clawing your cheeks, the landscape growing harsher, more silent. There is no sound of bells, no gossip of neighbors, no laughter of children. Here, the world is emptier than anywhere you've stepped before, and you sense exactly how terrifying exile must have felt. No warm hall, no songs, no shield brothers, no sisters to braid your hair. Only the endless dark of long winter nights, the howl of storms, the echo of your own breathing to keep you company, and the certainty that any face you saw might be the one to end you. You think about how exile acted like a final, brutal lesson, that all Viking power, all Viking courage, ultimately came from belonging. Take away their place in the village, and even the fiercest warrior became just another hungry wanderer. There is something deeply human in that, and also deeply frightening, because it reminds you how thin the wall is between civilization and the wild. One wrong step, and you could be outside those walls forever. You pause to rest, leaning on a half-buried stone, wondering how many outlaws tried to sneak back at night, desperate for a warm hearth, only to be cut down by the same neighbors they had once feasted with. That's a heartbreak few modern punishments could match. And still, for all its cruelty, exile was sometimes the only way a community could protect itself. If no feud, no blood price, no ordeal could fix the wrong, then removing the danger was the last defense. In that sense, it was cleaner than endless revenge, a cold mercy if you want to be generous. You breathe in, letting the wind whip your cloak, and sense the final pieces of Viking justice clicking together. Reputation was everything, but so was control. Their laws, harsh and twisted as they might look to you now, tried to keep order in a world where chaos waited right outside every door. A giant might strike, a neighbor might steal, a brother might kill. Viking justice was a shield against all that, made from the only materials they had: fear, memory, ritual, and community. You can't help but admire its brutal honesty, even if you'd never want to live under it. As you turn to leave the exile post behind, you feel a gentler thought surface. Maybe there was still some hope left for the exiles, some tiny chance to redeem themselves. Because the sagas remember even them. Stories say a few came home wiser, braver, changed by the wilderness, and found a place again. The law, after all, was never the final word. It was just the beginning of a much harder road toward forgiveness. And in that, you see a flicker of something comforting, even in this rough, dangerous world. Your steps grow easier, the long night wrapping itself around you, calm and steady. The giants of the law sleep now, their stones still watching, their words still whispering. And you are safe, far from their judgments, far from their punishments, free to rest and let your thoughts grow soft. Let your breath grow slower now, as if the hush of old halls and the distant fading runes were settling inside you. Picture those silent stones standing sentinel over all the harsh lessons of Viking justice, the blood prices, the feuds, the boiling water, the exile, and let them soften, no longer a threat, just memories etched into the earth. The night feels gentler after hearing their stories. The chill is only air, not a sentence. You feel a sense of safety, knowing you will never stand before a council of armed neighbors, never have to weigh the cost of an insult in silver, never hold out your burned hand to prove your truth. You can close your eyes, certain that no one will come in the darkness to drag you out into exile, that no one will count the price of your breath in iron coins, that no one will demand your children finish a feud you did not start. Let the steady rhythms of your own world, walls, warm beds, quiet streetlights, wrap around you like a shield. You have earned your peace tonight, free from the roaring storms that haunted Viking lives, free from the raw and biting law they tried so hard to follow. You are safe, you are home, you are warm. Breathe in, slowly, and let the stories of warriors and outlaws slip away, back to their stones and sagas, resting until someone calls them again. There is nothing left to fear. The feuds are finished. The judgments have passed. The earth lies quiet beneath you, patient as ever, holding even the wildest Viking dreams in its slow embrace. Sleep now, traveler. You will not be measured tonight. The night is yours.